Day Celebration Sunday. It's about pausing and being thoughtful and thankful for the Lord's work in our church family. Celebrating gospel life together is also means contemplating the ongoing work of Jesus in the world. Our passage in Luke 19 shows us what is most precious to Jesus. Notice that last verse that we just read, verse 10, the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost. Jesus devoted his whole life to seeking people who are lost from God so that they can find salvation with God. Jesus' encounter with Zacchaeus is all about spiritual rescue. Looking at this story, we wonder a little bit, who's seeking who as you read through it? Zacchaeus is trying to see Jesus. He's a little man climbing a big tree to see Jesus. But it's Jesus who finds Zacchaeus in the end. Jesus inviting himself into Zacchaeus' life. Who's seeking who? It's a wonderful brief snapshot that helps us celebrate the Lord Jesus and all that he is, especially that he came to seek and save the lost. How does anyone come to have Jesus in their lives? Do we find Jesus? Or does Jesus find us? How does anyone come to have Jesus in their life? Our passage answers that question by saying, climb a tree, ignore the muttering crowd, and welcome Jesus gladly into your life. I know I'm being a little cryptic in those little headlines, but I trust you in time you'll see what I mean. If you climb a tree, if you ignore the crowd, and you welcome Jesus gladly, he will be in your life. Yet once we see this, these same things help us as a church actually embrace every opportunity that we might have in Jesus' ongoing work to seek and to save the lost. When Jesus is in your life, inevitably you'll be drawn to seek and save the lost just as he is. Well, our big question, how does anyone come to have Jesus in their life? Firstly, the first bit of the answer we should notice comes from verses 1 to 4 in the passage, with a little man climbing a big tree. Jesus is passing through Jericho. It's helpful when reading Luke's Gospel, I think, to imagine Luke has a movie camera in his hand, okay? And he's trying to retell the story for us, retelling episodes in Jesus' life. Luke takes in a view with his movie camera. He catches what is said and done by people in that moment, and then he kind of cuts and he goes to another development. Now, outside Jericho, the crowd gathered around Jesus because he just healed blind Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus had no sight, but he could see who Jesus was, and was calling out to him, "Son of David, have mercy on me." It's a remarkable little story. And Jesus actually says it was Bartimaeus' faith that made him well, that brought about the healing. Now, as Jesus enters Jericho in our passage, Luke pans the camera to a little man who's almost attracting the crowd. He's short. Incidentally, Zacchaeus is a Jewish name that means something like the just or the pure. That's what his name means. In this traditional culture, names carried meaning. His parents hoped that he would be such a man, a just man, a pure man. But things don't always work out as parents might wish for. Luke tells us he was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. If we were there, standing behind Luke's camera doing the shots for him, we'd probably recognise this man by his clothing and jewellery that set him apart from the crowd. Yet Zacchaeus is a little man with a big reputation, kind of in a bad way. You see, under Roman occupation, the Jews paid taxes to Rome, and to collect the taxes, they had tax collectors. Zacchaeus is a chief one. And he was viewed as collaborating with the enemy. If you think of World War II and perhaps think of a handful of French citizens who became Nazi collaborators in France, that's kind of how Zacchaeus was viewed by the people in Jericho. Just as they were hated, those Nazi collaborators were hated in France, Zacchaeus is hated in Jericho. Hated because he gamed the system, and that's why he's wealthy. I think we're allowed to have a little giggle when we're reading verse 3 in our passage. Can you imagine verse 3? A little wee man, grown but boy-sized, ducking and diving, trying to see who Jesus was. And the crowd are pressing in. Everyone is tall for short people. Short people know that, don't they? And he can't get a glimpse of Jesus. So he's running ahead, isn't he, verse 4, climbing the sycamore tree, and so we have this little man up a big tree. In Jesus' day, their culture was far more formal than ours. Some ministers aren't even aware of tithing states. In Jesus' parable of the prodigal son, you might remember, the father hitches up his robes, showing his bare legs, and runs to his wayward son who's coming home. And it was scandalous that he would do that. Here in our passage, we've got a middle-aged man who's wealthy, well-dressed, and climbing a tree to see Jesus. He should have grown out of this kind of thing. It's less than respectable to be climbing a tree. Where's his dignity? Can you imagine Helen Haynes climbing a tree so she can see the Christmas parade properly? People just don't do that kind of thing, do they? That's what kids do. Even in our informal culture, some things should never be done. Helen Haynes shouldn't be up a tree looking at the Christmas parade. We don't like being laughed at, do we? So we steer clear of appearing to be childish in the eyes of others. Often we tend to find our own lane in life so we can avoid being laughed at. We discover what people think is okay and what's not okay, and we stick with the okay, because that's okay. But the kind of learned reflex that does that can be a big obstacle for people seeking the truth about Jesus. Those who don't know Jesus often intuitively sense they might be ridiculed if they leave their lane and go looking for Jesus. I was told a story once, an isolated little rural town where there was only one small evangelical congregation, just a handful of local believers in this town. Out of the blue, one Sunday, a local identity in this little town who never darkened the door of the church came and sat in a Sunday service. Everyone noticed that he was there. No one expected him to turn up, ever. And after the service, that's what was communicated to him. Never in a million years. What brought you here? The person telling me the story said he felt like kicking people in the shins at that point in time. The whole town was going to talk about him going to church as it was. He risked looking silly in the eyes of many people, wondering if at church he might discover something that changed his life. He all but got laughed at or ridiculed. What are you doing here? Zacchaeus is a little man up a big tree wanting to see Jesus. He's willing to pay a price to see Jesus. He's able to set aside any pride within himself. He's able to set aside his own dignity even, just to catch sight of Jesus. And Zacchaeus is showing us something important. How does Jesus come into your life? You've got to be willing to climb a tree, even look a little bit silly, to catch a glimpse of Jesus. We live in a culture where it has been uncool, silly, and to seriously investigate the truth about Jesus. It is an obstacle for many people. I know there are recent stories of young Gen Z people being more open to investigating the Christian faith. But even if a younger generation is more open than past generations, as Jesus says in another place, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom. Jesus in that place is not idealising childishness, but helping us realise that a childlike approach that is humble, not proud, teachable, not sceptical, open, not closed, is what opens the door to seeing the truth about God revealed to us in Jesus. If you're not yet a Christian believer, you'll find not much will change until you risk looking silly in the eyes of some people to find out more about Jesus, just like Zacchaeus. And as a church family, if we know that that's true, if we're aware that standing on our dignity can be an obstacle, then we make sure any question is never a silly question about Jesus. Any visitor is well looked after and they don't feel silly for visiting when they come among us. And if we're curious about Jesus, not pretending we know it all is a good step. It helps others be curious about Jesus. As they... It's interesting in our passage that Luke actually doesn't tell us why exactly Zacchaeus is trying to see Jesus. We're left to guess a little bit. Was it the energy of the crowd that pulled him in after Bartimaeus was healed and can see? Was it Jesus' reputation for compassion to outsider people, the fringes of society? He'd heard about that and wanted some of that in his life. Whatever it was, Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus, yet as we read on, it's Jesus who invites himself into Zacchaeus' life. How does anyone come have Jesus in their life? Well, Jesus will invite himself into your life by grace. And there he'll be. Notice verse 5. It is Jesus who reached the spot and looked up. No one at street level has an eye for the little man up the big tree. All the conversations at street level are about Jesus. All eyes are on Jesus and what he might say. But Jesus is the one who notices the little man up the big tree. We've just read, haven't we, Ezekiel 34, that wonderful passage about God's true nature. The sovereign Lord says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. I will search for lost and bring back the strays. That's what he declared that he would do. Zacchaeus may have felt invisible in the crowd. No one saw him. No one really wanted to see him. But Jesus never loses sight of his own people. Times and places and circumstances can vary greatly. Moments and conditions and settings can be different for different people. But God never fails to gather his people to himself. There's no indication that Jesus knows Zacchaeus from another time and place. There's this special moment. It's like the parable of the lost sheep in Luke 15. The shepherd in that parable has 99 sheep, but he leaves them in the open country where they're safe. No predators to come. And he goes after the one to bring back the one. It's all a picture of the character of God that Jesus wants us to be sure of. One stray matters to the Lord our God, and he won't rest until he has the one. The 100 must be complete. In our passage, Jesus doesn't ask Zacchaeus if it's convenient to stay at his place. Nor does Jesus check if Zacchaeus feels like it today. Is it okay if, working all right? Or if he'll be up to coming down the tree to speak with him. He doesn't ask any of those things. Jesus calls Zacchaeus by name and says, come down. I must stay in your house today. And that word must is actually quite literally, it is necessary. There's no other ways of this. Come down and let me enter into all of your life. But notice what happens when the crowd see this invitation, Jesus inviting himself into his life. Verse 7, all the people saw this and began to... If I asked you what has been stopping Zacchaeus from seeing Jesus, you'd say to me, it's the crowd, Stuart. Zacchaeus couldn't get past the crowd. He's short. Couldn't see. And that'd be true. That would be true. But it's not just his shortness. The muttering in verse 7 is all very moralistic, isn't it? The crowd are saying, Jesus has gone to be the guest of a sinner. Oh, there's a nice label. A sneering label. I'm looking down at you saying that. The crowd know Zacchaeus. They know his life. They know who he is. Zacchaeus is up a tree, but even as he climbs down, the crowd are looking down on him. This is what a moral majority can do and can be like. They have labels for people and they have their reasons for their labels. Clean people are clean because some of the ways they live are considered respectable. Dirty people are dirty because some of the ways they live life are thought to be wrong and dirty. What's alarming about our passage is that most of the crowd would have claimed to know the God of the Bible. Religious moralism can be nasty. A sense of superiority can leave shocked by certain beliefs or behaviours in people. When sins are unforgivable, people sigh and mutter about young people. In their mind, there's no coming back from where they are. To the great shame of the Christian church, this kind of thing has happened unchallenged in church life and history. If it were possible to count the number of people who've walked away from the Christian faith because of moralistic churches, I think we'd probably be shocked. It's a real barrier to coming to Jesus because it leaves people with the impression that Christianity is only for people who are nice and tidy as they live. Wonderfully, though, in our passage, Zacchaeus is drawn to Jesus despite the crowd's opinion of him. The power of gospel grace actually works like this. How does anyone come to have Jesus in their life? Well, Jesus invites himself in on the basis of his grace to you. So if you read through Luke's gospel, you'll find all kinds of remarkable encounters that people have with Jesus. One of those is the woman of the night who comes to Jesus at Simon the Pharisee's house. Time and time again we find Jesus being patient and kind with people whose lives are very complicated. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, says Jesus, but the sick, the lost. Grace, that is undeserved acceptance, always offers a fresh start. Grace doesn't ever write people off. Jesus seeks to save all kinds of lost people. And it's never about seeking out the pre-qualified who are tidy enough to be acceptable to God or nice enough to attract his love. Never like that. The only time Jesus denounces people in the gospel accounts is when he bumps into those who are pretending to be morally superior than the riffraff. And Jesus is inclined to yell at that point. Woe to you! Woe to you for looking down your noses at other people. In one place, Jesus cuttingly says, he who is forgiven little loves little. This the man he was speaking to had no love for this lost woman in the great need. In other words, if you don't think you need forgiving, you won't love God. In our passage, the order of think it's actually really important how it unfolds here. Jesus is inviting himself into Zacchaeus' life on the basis of grace, a gracious acceptance. Verse 5, he says, I must stay. It's necessary. There's only one way. And Jesus commits to Zacchaeus first. And then in verse 6, Zacchaeus welcomes Jesus gladly. The order of that's actually really important. It's gracious. Jesus doesn't say, clean up your life, make it good, and when you're all sorted, then I'll drop by. No, I must come and stay today. If you're not yet a believing Christian, please take notice of the order of things here. Religion likes saying, be good and live good long enough, and God will love you. But the gospel says, Jesus came to seek and save the lost. And you don't have to do anything for Jesus to make a start in your life. And Jesus' gracious acceptance really does transform lives. You can see verse 6 that Zacchaeus came down at once and welcomed him gladly. The idea is real hospitality at Zacchaeus' home. Jesus has come to stay. Not just one meal, but probably a little bit extended. And to eat with someone in their house in Jesus' day was to identify with them, to participate in life with them. You were saying to everyone who could see you, these are my people. I'm glad to be with them, a part of life with them. And that's what Jesus was doing, very publicly. You see verse 8? Jesus didn't enter Zacchaeus' life because he stopped cheating. No, Zacchaeus is generously now giving money away to the poor and promising to fix up things that are out of shape with the people he's cheated because of Jesus' undeserved love and loyalty to him. Grace is changing him. And the more Zacchaeus realises he has been generously loved by Jesus, he finds he cannot help but live a new life and become a generous man. His parents named him Zacchaeus, hoping to be just and pure. Didn't turn out that way for a long time, but now it is. Now it's changing. Zacchaeus is noticing his neighbour's needs because Jesus has touched the deepest part of his need. Grace has shifted his thinking. And in verse 8, when he says, if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay it back 4 times, that's not a 10th tithe or the 20% kind of injury payment that the book of Numbers speaks of. Now, this is a spectacular 4 times restitution. And it shows that Zacchaeus no longer hopes in the uncertainty of riches for his life. Salvation has come to this house, as Jesus says. And Jesus and the gospel grace have set this man on an adventure now. A new life, a new kind of life has begun unfolding. Old values that shaped his life are gone, and new values are here now. New life is taking shape even in these earliest moments with Jesus. You see that phrase, verse 8? Look, Lord, here and now. It's immediate change. Things are turning. This money thing is just the first here and now in his life. But there's a lifetime of learning in the here and now as he follows Jesus as Lord. You know, it is possible for us to resist the here and now. The steps of obeying Jesus, resist them and talk about thens and laters. You know, when I'm a little bit more grown up, then I'll get it. Later on. More than possible to have welcomed Jesus gladly into your life, yet find yourself resisting all that Jesus has for you. But not Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was struck by grace, and the more we are struck by grace, the more we will obey, trust and obey Jesus. Think it through with me. The man who said to Zacchaeus, come down from that tree, found himself nailed to the tree. And Jesus was lifted up to die. And the morally superior sneered at him, didn't they? He saved others, let him save himself if he's God's Messiah. But the irony of it all was that the man who won't rescue himself from the cross is rescuing others. The gospel teaches us that we are more lost and sinful than we like to admit. But because of what Jesus has done, we are more loved and precious to God than we ever dreamed would be possible. The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost, even at the cost of his own life. He died the death that we deserve, so that we might receive the life of love and grace in God. And you know, on this money thing in our passage, the more we realise Jesus has paid the price for our eternal security, the more our relationship with money will change in the here and now, in response to Jesus. The miser looks down on the spender, thinking, she needs to spend to feel alive. Stuff is her security. The spender looks down on the miser, thinking, he needs a bank balance to feel alive and secure. But the Christian finds, saved by grace, actively stops from looking down on anybody. Our whole relationship to wealth and stuff has changed, not only personally, but towards others as well. Christians become blind to wealth. Grace teaches us to love and care and help without partiality. We love people at church because the gospel teaches us to do that. More than that, the security of knowing salvation has come to our house means we'll find ourselves drawn into Jesus' mission, knowing that the Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. Yes, we can fear what the crowd might think of us, fear their rejection. Yes, we can fear not having the words to explain the hope that we have found in Christ. But the love of God compels us to be people that are part of Jesus' mission. Notice the remarkable little detail in verse 9. It's so surprising. Jesus says to Zacchaeus, this man too is a son of Abraham. As in, he was one ethnically, but now he's one spiritually. He's a new man. By grace, Jesus has made him to belong to God's forever family. He's got a new identity. He is loved and treasured. And for us, like Zacchaeus, the more we realise that Jesus has given us a new identity that is received, not achieved, the more the gospel will free us from our fears. We are more sinful and lost than we'd like to admit, but by grace, more dearly loved and treasured than we'd ever hoped was possible. Celebration Sunday is not just about remembering what God has done for us, but recommitting ourselves to what Jesus is still doing. He is seeking to save the lost, and his grace even draws us into that. How does anyone come to have life with Jesus? Well, not by sorting themselves out, not by impressing God, not by staying respectable in the eyes of the crowd, but by climbing a tree. Looking a bit silly to catch sight of Jesus and who he is, and being comfortable to do that. Ignoring the muttering of the crowd, refusing to let the voices of shame or superiority keep us away from the one who's come to seek and to save the lost. And as we welcome Jesus gladly, his grace is embraced. Grace that changes us now and forevermore. That's how we come to have Jesus in our life. And that's how others can have Jesus in their life. And God will seek to save the lost. Even through us. Through our lives, through our works, through our deeds. It's amazing to see God at work. Even if you look to the left or your right now, there are people trusting Jesus. God, you are trusting. It's a wonderful story unfolding that we are a part of. In patience. Father, we do ask that